we're calling in a representative from Virginia, a district in Virginia, Representative Don Beyer, who called Kevin McCarthy a lying liar, which is awesome. So we'll have a look at that. This is a bit of a viewing party for the January the 6th Commission, and yeah, welcome on board. The idea is to pay attention to this, to make noise about it, to make it more difficult for Republican voters to ignore what happened, to make it difficult for people to pretend that they were just tourists visiting the Capitol. So I use the hashtag Aquilino Gonell because he's an immigrant who became a Capitol police officer, and he's described with tears running down his face the opportunity that America offered him to become anything he wanted, and that he took an oath to help preserve and protect the United States. And he was afforded an opportunity to live up to that oath on the January the 6th, when he had to protect the Capitol building and the legislators inside from a horde of people who were attacking it. So let's see what we've got here. We'll share this. We'll say hello to any of my regular viewers. My hair's a bit messy. And we'll press play on some of the viewing party. In emotional testimony, Sergeant Aquilino Gonell says that January the 6th was like something from a medieval battle. He could feel himself losing oxygen and thought this was how he was going to die, defending democracy. His family members were desperately trying to reach him. So this is he. This country gave me the opportunity to become anything that I wanted. I raised my hand several times to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. On January the 6th, 2021, I fulfilled my oath once more. So yay. Oh, stereotypes about Americans. Why is that on this hashtag? Weird. Okay, but yes, kitchen disposal units is bizarre. It doesn't really encourage composting, does it? But okay, I'll save that for another day. In the meantime, I've bookmarked a live link to viewing the commission, so we can do that. What a relief is it to see that the circus members of the Republican Party that Kevin McCarthy nominated, Jim Jordan, famous for neglecting to help the student wrestlers who tried to alert him to the fact that the wrestling team's doctor was sexually assaulting them. Who else was nominated? Somebody with the surname of Banks? Jim Banks. Jim Banks, whose complicity in lying to Republicans, lying to anybody who'll listen about the origins of the Capitol attack, and lying about Nancy Pelosi's role. She doesn't have a role in organizing for the National Guard to come out. That was some well-placed Trump operatives. General Flynn, who's Michael Flynn, disgraced former General Michael Flynn's brother, Charles Flynn, who was part of the decision to hold back on deploying the National Guard for a number of hours. And also the Trump-appointed Secretary of Defense at the time, acting Secretary of Defense, Charles Miller. So let's see if people are going to be covering these things. Oh, there we go. Party.
had stolen my radio. Terrorists were scaling the scaffolding on tower that was in front of us, attempting to breach the waist-high metal fencing. That was the only barrier we had aside from ourselves. The sea of people was punctuated throughout by flags. Another read, "Jesus is my..." It was clear the terrorists perceived themselves to be mans and continued to assault. Gas, street space. In the rooms, through our own CS, through our own, and sprayed us with their own OC. Either they bought themselves or stole from us. Later, I learned at least one of them was spraying us in the face with wasp spray. The terrorists alternated between attempting to break our defenses and shouting at or attempting to convert us. Men alleging to be veterans told us how they had fought for this country and were fighting for it again. One man tried to start a chant of 4 more years. Another shouted, "Do not attack Black Lives Matter," as if political affiliation how we determine when to use force. A man in a QAnon, "This is the time to choose which side of history to be on." A man whose shirt read "God, Guns, and Trump" stood behind silently holding a Trump flag. A new man came to fix it on me, continually berating me, telling me to take out my gear and give it to him, to show solidarity with we the people, or we're going to run over you. His voice cracked with the strain and the volume of his threats. He continued, "Do you think your little pea shooter guns are going to stop this crowd? No, we're going in that building." Eventually, there was a surge of the buckle broke apart, and we were unable to hold the line. A chaotic melee ensued. Terrorists pushed through the line and engaged us in hand-to-hand combat. Several attempted to knock me over and steal my baton. One latched onto my face and got a thumb in my right eye, attempting to push it. I cried out in pain and managed to shake him off. Before any permanent damage was done. I couldn't fully engage anyone. For the moment I do is when another 20 terrorists move in to attack while my hands are full. It was all we could do to keep ourselves on our feet and continue to fall back. I'm sprayed with a fire extinguisher and a red smoke grenade burns at our feet. In the fight, a terrorist is knocked to the ground and his jacket rides up, exposing a large hunting knife on his belt. I, along with several other officers, piled on him, while another removed the knife from his person. He regained himself unharmed and shouts indignantly, "What are you doing? What are you guys doing?" At this point, the terrorists had claimed most of the western terrace, cornering myself and other officers on the southern edge. I found a side stair off of the terrace up to an upper landing, followed by more stairs up and inside. Inside the Capitol building, officers walked through the halls briefly and they found a place to sit, decontaminated of OC, take a quick breather. I followed suit. So I made a package of water bottles and was passing them out. I washed off my face as best I could, rinsed out my mouth and drank the rest. Opportunity of relative safety to don my gas mask. Not long afterward, I heard someone calling for officers to move to assist. I steeled myself for another round and descended a stairway into a long hallway filled with smoke and screams. The building is labyrinthine, but judging from the evidence combat, I could tell I led outside to the terrorists had forced our retreat. Officers were stacked deep. Every so often, one would fall back from the first injury, struggling to breathe, and those who remained would take a step forward. It was a battle of inches, with one side pushing the other a few, and then the other side regaining their ground. At the time, I, and I suspect many others in the hallway, did not know that the terrorists had gained entry into the building by breaking in doors and windows elsewhere. So we believed ours to be the last defense before the terrorists had true access to the building and to potentially our elected representatives. Eventually, it was my turn to under the front line. The terrorists had a wall of shit stolen from officers, as well as stolen batons, their armaments they brought. Even during this intense contest of wills to convert us to their cult, one man shouted, "We all just want to make our voices heard, and I think you feel the same. I really think you feel the same." All while another man attempts to batter us with a stolen shield. Another man, like many others, didn't seem to appreciate this wasn't a game. Fought his way the steps through the westerns, audience scattered at the front line. This final threshold was asking us to hold on because he has asthma. A metal door frame that sat in the middle of the hallway. At the front line, I guarded myself so the frame was at my back and gave myself something to brace against, provide additional strength when pushing forward. Unfortunately, soon after I secured this position, the momentum shifted and we lost the ground that got me there. On my left, with a clear riot shield stolen during the assault, he slammed it against me and with all the weight of the bodies pushing behind him, trapped me. My arms were pinned and effectively useless, trapped against either the shield on my left or the door frame on my right. Posture granting me no functional strength or freedom of movement, I was effectively defenseless and gradually sustaining injury from the increasing pressure of the mob. Directly in front of me, I missed the opportunity of my vulnerability. He grabbed the front of my gas mask and used it to beat my head against the door. He switched to pulling it off my head, the straps stretching against my skull and straining my neck. He never uttered any words I recognized, but opted instead for guttural screams. I remember him foaming at the mouth. He also put his cell phone in his mouth so that he had both hands free to assault me. Eventually, he succeeded in stripping away my gas mask, and a new rush of exposure to CS and OC spray hit me. The mob of terrorists were coordinating their efforts now, shouting, "Heave! Ho!" as they synchronized, pushing their weight forward, crushing me further against the metal door frame. The man in front of me grabbed my baton that I still held in my hands, and in my current state, I was unable to retain my weapon. He bashed me in the head and face with it, rupturing my lip and adding additional injury to my skull. At this point, I knew I couldn't sustain much more damage and remain upright. At best, I would collapse and be a liability to my colleagues. At worst, be dragged out into the crowd and lynched. Unable to move or otherwise signal the officers behind me that I needed to fall back, I did the only thing that I could do and screamed for help. Thankfully, my voice was heard over the cacophony of yells and the blaring alarm. The officer closest to me was able to extricate me from my position, and another helped me fall back to the building again. I had found some more water and decontaminated my face as best I could. I don't know how long I waited in the halls for, but soon after I got back on my feet and went to the front where the fight was again. Until reinforcements arrived, every able body made a difference. Without my gas mask, I was afraid I'd be a liability in the hallway, so I took the exit outside of the upper landing above the West Terrace. I found a police line being held and the terrace encircling us, much like on the West Terrace lower. It was getting later in the day, however, and most of the mob was content to yell rather than try to our line. After some time of guard landing, I asked the force right from the step. I'm not sure which law enforcement, but I turned and started clapping, as it was a sign that badly needed help was starting to finally arrive. After that, I started feeling the effects of the day taking their toll, went back inside to rest. Gradually, all the media 42 gathered in the room known as the Capitol. We checked on each other and convalesced, glad to see each other in one piece. Despite our exhaustion, we would have ran out into the fight again should the need have arisen. Thankfully, as the day wore on, more and more resources had arrived at the Capitol to drive off the terrorists. We stayed in the crypt until quite late. And even after we were allowed to leave the grounds, we didn't get to go home. Those who needed immediate medical attention took a van to the local hospital, while the rest of us parked near the city center until the city was secure enough for us to take off. I believe we finally got that message around 1 a.m. the following morning. We drove back to the 4th District and from there went home. Thank you for letting me testify.
Thank you very much. for your testimony. I now recognize Officer Dunn to summarize his testimony.
Chairman Thompson, members of the Select Committee, thank you for the opportunity today to give my account regarding the events of January 6, 2021. From my firsthand experience as a Capitol Police officer, directly involved in those events, and still hurting from what happened that day. I'm providing this testimony solely in my personal capacity and not as a representative of the police. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment of my time to ask for a moment of silence for my fallen colleague, Officer Brian Sicknick, who died from injuries he sustained in the line of duty defending the capital of our beloved democracy. Thank you. I reported for duty at the Capitol as usual early on the morning of January 6th. We understood that the vote to certify President Biden's election would be taking place that day, and protests might occur outside the Capitol. But we expected any demonstrations to be peaceful expressions of First Amendment freedoms, just like the scores of demonstrations we had observed for many years. After roll call, I took my overwatch post on the east front of the Capitol, standing on the steps that led up to the Senate chamber. As the morning progressed, I did not see or hear anything that gave me cause for alarm. But around 10:56 a.m., I received a text message from a friend forwarding a screenshot of what appeared to be the potential plan of action, very different from a peaceful demonstration. The screenshot bore the caption, January 6th, Rally Point, Lincoln Park, and said the objective was the Capitol. It said, amongst other things, that Trump has given us marching orders and to keep in. It urged people to bring your kids and gas masks to link up early in the day and sit. It indicated time. Seeing that message caused me concern. Looking back now, it seemed to foreshadow what happened later. At the time, though, we had not received any threat warnings from our chain of command. I had no independent reason to believe that violence was headed our way. As the morning progressed and the crowd of protests began to swell on the east side, many displaying comics. The crowd was chanting, "Stop the steal," and "We want Trump." But demonstration was still being conducted in a peaceful manner. Early that afternoon, Capitol Police dispatched all units on the radio that we had an active 10-100 at the Republican National Committee. 10-100 is code for a suspicious package such as a potential bomb. That radio dispatch got my attention, and I started to get more nervous and worried, especially because the crowds on the east front of the Capitol were continuing to grow. At the same time, I started receiving reports on the radio about large crowd movements around the Capitol, coming from the direction of the ellipse to both the west and east fronts of the Capitol. Then I heard radio calls for additional officers to respond to the west side and an exclamation, "Death boys." Side had defense. Now it was obvious. I quickly put on a steel chest plate, weighs 20 pounds, wearing my M4 right sprinter north side Capitol, and the railing of the inaugural stage. A broad view where I had a view of what I was stunned by what I saw. And what seemed like a sea of people, Capitol police officers and Metropolitan Police officers, MPD, were engaged in desperate hand-to-hand fighters across the West Lawn. Until then, I had never seen anyone physically assault Capitol Police or MPD, let alone witness mass assaults being perpetrated on law enforcement officers. I witnessed the rioters using all kinds of weapons against officers, including flagpoles, metal bike racks that they had torn apart, and various kinds of projectiles. Officers were being bloodied in the fighting. Many were screaming, and many were blinded and coughing from chemical irritants being sprayed in their faces. I gave decontamination aid to as many officers as I could, flushing their eyes with water to dilute the chemical irritants. Soon thereafter, I heard, "Attention all units, the Capitol that rioters in various places inside the building has been breached inside the." At that point, I rushed into the Capitol with another officer, going first to basement on the Senate side, where I'd heard an MPD officer needed a defibrillator. Turning outside to the West Terrace to assist officers, I went back into the Capitol and up the stairs towards the crypt. There I saw rioters who had invaded the Capitol carrying a Confederate flag, a red MAGA flag, and a "Don't Tread on Me" flag. I decided to ground there to prevent any from heading down the stairs to the lower residence, because that's where officers were getting decontamination aid and were particularly vulnerable. At the top of the stairs, I confronted a group of insurrectionists, warning them do not go down those steps. One of them shouted, "Keep moving, patriots." Another displayed what looked like a law enforcement badge and told me, "We're doing this for you." One of the invaders approached me like he was going to try to get past me and head down the stairs. I hit him, knocking him down. Relieved by other officers in the crypt, I took off running upstairs towards the speaker's lobby and helped the plainclothes officer who was getting hassled by insurrectionists. Some of them were dressed like militia group. Vests, cargo pants, and body armor. I was physically exhausted and it was hard to breathe and see because of all the chemical spray in there. More and more insurrectionists pouring into the area by the speaker's lobby near the rotunda, and some wearing MAGA hats and shirts that said 20. I told them to just leave the Capitol, and in response they yelled, "No, man, this is our house. President Trump invited us here. We're here to stop him. Joe Biden is not the president. Nobody voted for Joe Biden." I'm a law enforcement officer, and I do my best to keep politics out of my job. But in this circumstance, I responded, "Well, I voted for Joe Biden. Does my vote not count? Am I nobody?" That prompted a torrent of racial epithets. One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? This nigger voted for Joe Biden." Then the crowd, perhaps 20 people, joined in screaming, "Boo, fucking nigger." No one had ever called me a nigger while wearing the uniform of a Capitol Police officer. In the days following the attempted insurrection, other Black officers shared with me their own stories of racial abuse on January 6th. One officer told me he had never, in his entire 40 years of life, been called a nigger to his face, and that streak ended on January 6th. Yet another officer later told me he had been confronted by insurrectionists in the Capitol who told him, "Put your down, show you what kind of nigger you really are." To this afternoon is a blur. went throughout the Capitol to assist officers in aid, helping more script and was to an unconscious woman who had been in the crowd of rioters on the west side of the Capitol. I carried her to the area of the House Majority Leader, chief of CPR. Afternoon wore on. I was completely both physically and emotionally, and in shock, total disbelief over what had happened. Once the building was cleared to the rotunda to her with officers, Representative Rodney and share our experiences from what happened that afternoon. Rodney Davis was there offering support to officers. And when he and I saw each other, he came over and he gave me a big hug. I sat down on the bench of rotunda with mine, who was also a black. Him about the racial slurs I became very emotional, began yelling, how the blank something like this happened. I began sobbing. Officers came over to console me. Later on January 6th, after order and security had been restored in the Capitol through the hard work and sacrifices of law enforcement, members took the floor of the House to speak out about what had happened that day. Among them was House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Along with the fellow officers, I had protected that day and will protect tomorrow. I had protected that day and will protect today and tomorrow. And the minority leader, to his great credit, said violent destruction and chaos we saw earlier was unacceptable, undemocratic, and un-American. It was the saddest day I've ever had serving in this institution, end quote. Members of the select committee, the minority leader was absolutely right. How he described what took place in the Capitol. And for those of us in the Capitol Police who serve and revere this institution and who love the Capitol building, it was a sad day for us as well. More than 6 years later, January 6th still isn't over. I've had to avail of multiple counseling sessions from the Capitol Police Employee Assistance Program, and I'm now receiving private counseling therapy for the persistent emotional trauma of that day. I've also participated in many peer support programs with fellow law enforcement officers from around the United States. I know so many other officers continue to hurt, both physically and emotionally. I want to take this moment to speak to my officers of the emotions they're continuing to experience. There's absolutely nothing wrong with seeking professional counseling. Through that was traumatic. You are hurting the counseling services that are available to us. I also respectfully ask that this select committee review the available resources, the services available to us, and consider whether they are sufficient enough to meet our needs, especially with respect to the amount of leave that we are allowed. In closing, we can never again allow democracy to be put in peril, as it was on January 6th. I thank the members of the Select Committee for your commitment to determine what led to disaster at the Capitol on January 6th, what actually took place that day, and what steps should be taken to prevent such an attack on our democracy from ever happening again. I also want to thank and acknowledge my brothers and sisters in blue who fought alongside me on January 6th to protect our democracy. Each of you is a hero, and it is my honor to serve with you each and every day. I thank the American people for all of the support that they have provided these past several months to me and my fellow officers. Lastly, the rioters, the insurrectionists, and the terrorists Democracy went on that night and still exists today. Democracy is bigger than any one person and any one party. You all tried to disrupt democracy that day, and you all failed. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Goodness, their testimony.
Thank you, everyone.
The
Take care.
rules
Goodbye.
actually allowed you the opportunity to tell your story. There's
I'm sure you might be watching this on your television if you're free, or dipping in and out during the day. It's up to us to keep this conversation going. It's so important. And I'd like to say tomorrow, or maybe even later this evening, I'll do a broadcast about one man's blog, which I found very important, who noted that people on the right are trying to weaponize white childhood and the potential fragility of white childhood to claim that racism and racist history should not be taught in American schools, and that those efforts succeed unless a spirited opposition is mounted. So I'll be talking later on about how we can manifest or vocalize that type of opposition, how we can insist that children are actually stronger and better for learning real history and not being part of the vulnerabilities that an abridged form of history creates for children who grow into the type of adults who then call officers names and racial slurs as they seek to sack the Capitol and overturn democracy. So thank you, Marsha. Good news of the day, New York City is sending some mental health professionals with emergency medical services to some 9/11 calls, and the pilot program is seeing a reduced rate of hospitalizations. That is fantastic news, Bob. Thank you for your invaluable contribution to this broadcast so that we can have an end note of good news. Hooray for you. Cosmic Rose, hello, thank you. Bye, Marsha and Paul and Bob. And anyone else who joined in, and Eric and anyone else who joined in with the broadcast today. Thank you so much for your constancy of spirit, and thank you for caring about American democracy. We will continue to work on harnessing the forces of decency so that our passion is equally vocal and equally potent, and more potent than the passion of deluded fascist mobsters who support a crook and a gang of Republican crooks. Cheers, everyone. Take care.